Welcome back, everyone, to Curing the Curriculum. Today, we are being joined by none other than Professor Fred Hafferty to talk about something he literally helped define: the hidden curriculum of medicine. But before we dive in, a quick heads up. Normally, we keep our episodes brief for you to listen to them on the go. This one turned into something different. Fred generously brought a lot of time and his remarkable mind to the conversation, allowing us to dive deep. So deep, in fact, that you might want to grab pen and paper. Because I had to tune in and catch the rhythm of Fred's thoughts, the first half of the episode takes its time. But once it clicked, something beautiful happened. We ended up bouncing around from what medical schools could learn from prisons and improv comedy, how to learn how to drive with a fresh set of eyes, and how even curriculum accreditation pressures shape our experiences. Fred also reflects on the friction of being different in the medical world, and we dream about the curriculum of the future. Basically, this turned into a wonderful episode that I'll be listening to again. And I hope you enjoy it as much as we did. Frederick Hafferty is Emeritus Professor of Medical Education at the Mayo Clinic and the University of Minnesota. He's also adjunct professor at the Department of Neurology at the Yale School of Medicine. He's also a senior scholar at the Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education, abbreviated ACGME. He started his career as a sociologist by training with a PhD in medical sociology. And besides very impactful research on topics like professionalism and ethics in medical education, he's widely known for introducing the concept of the hidden curriculum in the medical world. As this hidden curriculum was also kind of the starting point and main motivator for setting up this podcast, I'm incredibly happy that Professor Hafferty agreed to join us in order to elaborate on this concept, as well as his insights from 50 years of research, policy making, and acting as leading voice in medical education. Fred, a very warm welcome, and thanks a lot for being here.
It's my pleasure, Olsen. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm touched to be included as a part of your podcast.
You're very welcome. Before we dig in, I think it's good to start with a definition, what the hidden curriculum is. Could you maybe share one with us?
The hidden curriculum refers to the unspoken or implicit lessons, values, and social norms that students learn in school beyond the officially planned curriculum. It encompasses the unwritten rules, expectations, and behavior that shape student experiences and understanding of the school environment. I would just add to that the word curriculum is in part limiting because the interface of the formal and other than formal exists in social life in general. And so this is not just about what happens in school, although it speaks to what happens in the educational process, but it's also what happens in social life in general.
Thank you very much also for your additions to this. I believe you have also brought a second definition with you.
This is from somebody else. The hidden curriculum is the set of influences that function at the level of organizational structure and culture, including, for example, the implicit rules to survive the institution, such as customs, rituals, and taken for granted aspects of social life.
Survival is strong wording, yes.
I think that to the extent that you have a coexistence and co-creation of both the formal and the other than formal. The word survival, which has a slightly stronger normative valence, or the word navigate, or highly appropriate. If you don't understand the other than formal aspects of the environment that you seek to operate within, you're going to get into trouble. And in part, you are going to, at minimum, be identified as an outsider, perhaps also be informally rebuked, or perhaps also formally sanctioned for not operating not just within the guide rails provided by the formal, but by all of those idiosyncratic and informal norms and the like that operate alongside of the formal. You'll get into trouble.
Navigating in such a way you don't get into trouble. Very, very interesting. So, to dig in, I read a quote you used, one of your publications, which I liked. I believe it was from Peter Berger. The first wisdom of sociology is this: things are not what they seem. You use this quote to open a chapter in which you, together with Brian Castellani, elaborate on the hidden curriculum in medical education.
Mm-hmm.
Can you take us along on your journey and share how your background in sociology led you to become such an important researcher of medical education?
Well, I don't know about the important part. The journey has been an interesting one that in some respects I haven't thought that much about. I'm thinking that it begins with a life lesson that I've sort of carried with me, and that is I don't hear very well. I was born with a rather severe hearing loss and spent a lot of time during my K through 12 education, so grade school and high school, attending special classes on lip reading and speech therapy. And one of the drivers there was the fact that it became apparent to me pretty early on that what was said and what I heard oftentimes were two different things, and that I needed to negotiate the space between those two things, or I had to occupy the space between those two things, because I couldn't assume that what was real or what was going on for everybody else was going to be the same as what was going on for myself. I think going to college was a blessing and a curse. It was a curse in the sense that I was going to a learning environment that I wasn't prepared for. And all of a sudden, going from smaller class sizes in high school to big lecture rooms where, at worst, I had to always sit up front, if only because I needed to hear. And that, too, a space between what was taking place in the classroom formally and what I was getting were oftentimes two different things. On the plus side, I was involved in a gigantic experiment as an undergraduate. I didn't know I was part of an experiment as an undergraduate or even that it was considered an experiment, but at the time at Harvard, sociology, psychology, and anthropology were all combined into a new major called social relations. And so my education largely was multidisciplinary or perhaps even interdisciplinary. And as such, I didn't know that a lot of what I was getting was sociology because I never took any courses that said, you're taking a sociology course. Then, in turn, going off to graduate school, I started graduate school. I wanted to be a criminologist. I wanted to study social deviance. And that's what I was headed towards until I took a course called medical sociology. I didn't even know that such a thing existed. Oh, I should backtrack a little bit because as an undergraduate, I found out that in part because of my background and training and or lack, I was not going to be able to go to medical school. I had entered college as a pre-med and quickly discovered that I was going to be doing very poorly in my classes. I was doing very poorly in my classes, and I needed to find a different major. And wound up in this thing called social relations. In any event, back to graduate school and being introduced to medical sociology was a way of getting back into medicine. And so I dropped being a criminologist. The school I was at didn't have a major in medical sociology, so I transferred to Yale, and they did, but where did my money come from? Well, it wasn't the Department of Sociology. There was a new program down the street called Health Services Research, and they sent me down there. And that's where I had my desk, and that's where I had to take health services research courses. And meanwhile, I wasn't part in the same way that the other graduate students were part of the department. And all of the informal social networks, the water cooler talk, if you will, none of that. It was happening, but I wasn't a part of it. I was somewhat outside. And then when it came time to graduate, well, I should take another step back. Dissertation. What was I going to do? Classwork is over, dissertation time. And I was very fortunate. I wanted to do some kind of ethnography about medical education. And I went off to New York to do that. My dissertation advisor said, no, you can't do that. You need to do some kind of questionnaire-based study on undergraduates, and the general topic for me was death and dying. You know, undergraduate students' attitudes on death and dying. How boring! And I said no, and in some sense fired my dissertation advisor, or requested that I have a new dissertation advisor. And one was appointed, and he promptly went on sabbatical. And so now I didn't have my second dissertation advisor, and a individual stepped into the picture, Professor Daniel Bell, who was at the time doing more international sociology. He had no background in medical sociology at all, but became my de facto advisor and shepherded me through the writing process and the analysis of the data and everything, where I was now involved in accompanying a medical school class through their first year of medical school. That graciousness on his part went a long way towards being given an incredible amount of latitude in how I went about doing the work that I was doing, because there wasn't anybody in the picture that was saying, oh, well, that's not how medical sociology does things. I mean, my active dissertation advisor wasn't a medical sociologist. And that that latitude and support was instrumental so that when it came time to graduate, I never really went on the job market. I had two possibilities. One was in a medical school and one wasn't. And I chose the medical school one. And now things began to coalesce. Now I'm in a different world, or a completely different world. I'm teaching in a medical school. I'm part of a Department of Behavioral Science, which was another attempt to unify the social sciences, but this time within medicine. This became ultimately the second failed experiment that I was a part of, because at least within the US, the behavioral science movement that was originally dreamed up by my first boss, Bob Strauss, eventually petered out. And yet and I hope you don't mind this story, I'm teaching medical students who, one, are very bright, amazingly bright, fascinatingly bright, and they don't want to be you. They don't want to grow up to be medical sociologists. They want to grow up to be doctors. And that awakening, along with being in a classroom, talking, delivering content, lecture, but hopefully with lots of discussion, and somebody raises their hand. Yes. Oh, and the hand comes from the back of the room, which I came to learn is code for a certain type of student. There are three tiers of students I came to learn. They're the students at the front of the classroom, the gunners, students at the back of the classroom. Well, I don't know if they had a word, but they were a little more relaxed about stuff. And then there was everybody in the middle, the rest of the class. Anyway, a question came from the back of the room. Is this going to be on the test? And I went, oh, I'd never heard that question before. That was not a question that came out of my graduate school training. The test orientation. I don't want to make too much a point of it, but it's not whether I was doing hidden curriculum work or not. The question for me was, why is this a question? Why is this important? Not, oh, terrible students. They're not interested in my material. They're not interested in what I'm teaching. They're just trying to game me. No, no, what's going on here? These are very bright people. And the question made sense to everybody in the room. Didn't make sense to me. I had to learn what that question meant. And the only way I was going to learn what that question meant was by asking them, why is this an important question? How do I learn? And now we come maybe to hidden curriculum stuff. What else is going on here? And how has this frame, what's on the test, become what's important for the students as opposed to what is going on in the formal curriculum? Now, meanwhile, the dissertation is all sitting in the background. I haven't done anything with it. The book that came out of the dissertation came maybe 5 years later. And even there, the hidden curriculum was never a term that was in the book, but the frames of anatomy, which was one of the things that I went through with the students. All of the things that students were learning that weren't part of the curriculum. It was incredible. Now, one of the things I was interested in was this notion of death and dying. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was big at that time, and she talked about the 5 stages of death and dying. And it was a very psychological framing of the exposures to the dying and exposures to death in society in general. And there was a lot of language around that in terms of fear of death and dying and existential crises and the like. And I just couldn't get it out of my head that maybe students, in this case, medical students, were learning norms, social norms about how to deal with death and dying, and that it might not all be psychological, might not all be existential. And anatomy became one part of that experience. The second part was a field trip for class as a whole in waves, several students at a time, to a hospital for the dying. And the third was a completely unexpected, the death of a elderly gentleman, part of an interviewing and communications class, and then in turn how the school responded to that death, and in effect how the school tried to get the students to frame the experience in certain ways while they were wanting to frame it in different ways. All of that helped me to want to explore more the general notion of, given that something is happening, and it doesn't make any difference to me what it is. In many cases, I can't anticipate it. So it's, whatever the example, it's a form of a hand going up and a question being asked or something happening where now I want to try and understand what else is going on and not be so quick to label it. And maybe we're going back now to my initial interest in criminology, not being quick to label it as some kind of deviance. Oh, this is wrong. This is bad. Students shouldn't be approaching learning in this way. I don't care whether they should or they shouldn't. That's not my issue. My issue is trying to understand what's going on. And I am and have been immensely appreciative of all of the medical students, all of them. Some whom liked me and some who didn't. Some I liked and some I didn't. But all of them have been incredible teachers for me in the experience of experiencing their world. It's just a fascinating place. There is so much going on within that interstitial space between the formal and the other than formal that you could spend a lifetime, because the space changes. It's very dynamic. It's very interactive. It can appear to be ad hoc. Oh, this is just some random student. He's asking for himself. I think it was a he. About, is this going to be on the test? No, Fred, he's not asking for himself. He's asking for the entire class. You have a question from an individual, but it's not a question from an individual. It's a question from the class as a whole. And oh, this is terrible. This means that they don't care about my subject area, but they don't ask questions like that in other classes. Duh. They're asking it all the time. That's how they're going through medical school. Is this on the test or is it not on the test? And anyway, I should stop at this point because I can't both remember what I've said to you and where I'm taking the story, except that it's been a wonderful ride that continues to be fascinating in so many different ways, including your podcast.
What a ride indeed. Thank you so much for sharing your story and the role that being an outsider has played. And of course, thank you for being a listener. You have researched the hidden curriculum for many years. Could you maybe share with us a bit more about what you have learned in more recent times about the hidden curriculum?
Well, one of the things that I'm finding out about the hidden curriculum in general now comes from, and I'm looking off to my side, in the Reflective Zombie podcast, I think you made the observation we are only allowed to reflect about ourselves, not about the institution. And I found that immensely provocative because you broadened the conversation from the very important observations about the sort of ritualization of reflection. The learning and how that learning takes place would be what would be fascinating to me. That reflection constituted a certain kind of product that was going to be acceptable to the faculty. So they didn't just want you to reflect. There were either formal, I wouldn't know yet. There were formal or other than formal lessons on what constituted a proper reflective piece. And Annie mentioned a favorite paper, and I'm going to get the title a bit wrong of this. They like it when you cry.
Yes, I believe it was They Like It If You Said You Cried.
Marvelous. And how do you learn that? How do students come to understand that this is what something means, or this is the best way to present myself in order to navigate my way through a learning environment that is, among other things, strange in and of itself? But you took it to another level of perhaps a hidden curriculum lesson that reflection is about individuals. It's about yourself, and that you are best going through medical education by focusing on things at the individual level, and that you're actually not, it's not encouraged. I'm going to take you literally and ask you if you want to make any comments about it. You're not supposed to go reflect on the organization. What an interesting way to get you. Now we're getting a little bit into motives, and I don't like to get into motives because that's a little more psychology than sociology. But the ways in which the organization gives itself a free pass. We're going to set up both a structure and a culture that exempts the organization from critical scrutiny. And that's very interesting. Now you start wondering, well, how many different ways might that take place? How can I understand this better? I have this one quote: we are only allowed to reflect about ourselves, not about the institution. And how do I take that and see how many different ways there might be similar kinds of informal rules about what it means to, in this case, reflect, but what it means to in lots of other things? I'll stop there. So anyway, I won't stop there. So your podcast already is just full of both hidden curriculum issues, but also just a kind of hidden curriculum mindset that as I was listening to it, I felt very at home. And I didn't have a way of saying to you, except maybe now, thank you. The listening, and I took pages of notes, was a wonderful experience for me, a way into the world of medical education and a way into the world of being a stranger in the world of medical education. So your comments about coming from Germany and You're seeing things that the Dutch students did not. Powerful. What are those things? Why aren't they seeing what you're seeing? They may say, you're making stuff up. They may say, you're just too sensitive. All of those kinds of reactions, now we have terms like gaslighting and the like, are ways of taking other possible insights into what's going on and negating them. And we haven't even got to faculty yet, because I'm still going to believe everybody is well-meaning, but when you suggest that other things may be going on to the people who are running the ship, that's calling into question the integrity of something that they're building and operating. And that is not necessarily well received. So this issue of being an outsider, whether it's being a PhD in an MD world, whether it's being a social scientist in a basic science world. I mean, most of my colleagues, when I started teaching, were anatomists, biochemists, physiologists, endocrinologists. They were all not me. And I've never worked in a department of sociology. I've never had, directly speaking, sociology colleagues. So maybe a good part of my whole career has been, it's not, there's a wonderful essay by a colleague in essay in academic medicine about making things strange as a good vehicle for investigation. For me, this is hyperbole. I don't have to make things strange. Much of what's going on around me is strange. I still don't hear everything that people say. We were talking about humor before and humorous stories. I don't hear the punchline in most humorous stories, if only because the punchline oftentimes is delivered in a lower tone of voice. Or I will hear people laughing, and I'll go, "What's funny? I've missed it." Now I have to work to figure out what's going on, what's funny. So making things strange, no. It's been a fun, stressful ride, but a fun ride in very strange worlds where trying to figure out what else is going on in addition to the official statements of what's going on is, I guess, what I've built my career on. I'll say one more thing about it and let you jump in with more questions. Something that helped push the hidden curriculum cart even more forward was the move in the late 1990s, early 2000s, with medicine, at least in the US, ramping up its modern day professionalism movement. So all of a sudden, my dean is telling me, you got to teach about professionalism. Why? Well, because the accrediting bodies is going to come in and ask, where's your professionalism stuff? And coming to the realization that much of what was being taught, whether I was teaching it or not, was not what the students were encountering when they were on the wards, in the clinics, in the hospitals, etc. The professionalism of the classroom was different than the professionalism of the clinic. And that was one distinction. The other really important distinction, and it's something I'm still very involved in, is that the professionalism of my years as a sociology graduate student, so the professionalism of the 1970s, with the Elliot Freitzens and the Marie Howes and the John McKinleys, et cetera, that was about medicine as a profession. And all of a sudden, I'm encountering a professionalism in medicine that's all about the individual and the that issues of professionalism or lack of professionalism are being played out at the level of the individual. And so the definitions and the curriculum and the coursework and the competencies were all about individuals. And trying to imagine or reimagine professionalism at the level of organizations or at the level of social institutions is, for me, the big journey right now as I come up against both social structures and organizational cultures and the like that send out lots of messages that the way to both navigate and understand what's going on in the world of medical education is at the level of individuals. I'll stop there.
Thank you for introducing me to these different concepts. And before we get into professionalism, I was wondering, so should we call them institutions or organizations, or they're the same? And how should we look at the individual level then compared to that?
That winds up being a somewhat difficult space within medical education because the preferred term is institution. And for me, that winds up being problematic because usually conversations take place at the level of individuals. And as a sociologist, I find that difficult because in many cases, those conversations wind up being about affect or motive or cognition at the level of individuals. And getting up to the group level, and particularly the group level at the level of organizations, is somewhat difficult. But if they're called institutions, then it becomes very difficult to get a frame around going beyond organizations and thinking about the organizations as also existing in a collective space, as well as the broader issues of social norms and broader social understandings and practices.
To come back to your previous point about professionalism, I would love to hear more about the difference of professionalism in the classroom and professionalism in the clinics. Is that something that is then part of this hidden curriculum, that there's different curricula in the classroom than in the clinic? Or how does this play out? What have you observed?
Oh dear. I thought I was going to be able to answer you with a short yes for the first question. And the second part of your question was the playing out is much, much more difficult because we have to go back, for me anyway, we have to go back to a central tenet for me of context matters. And I don't have an answer for this yet. I don't know why. I want to find out. But as medicine rolled out its professionalism movement, it largely initially targeted medical students. And so I was given marching orders in my medical school to teach professionalism, but it had to do with first generating definitions. We need to define it better. Okay, we'll come up with some definitions of professionalism. And also, we need to assess it. And what are we going to assess? Well, part of what we were going to assess early on, since it was just another subject matter, we get to create tests for the material in the class. Did they learn what was being taught? And the vehicle of things like role models and the like, those were going to be things that they were going to encounter someplace else and in other ways. And finding out that these 10 behaviors of professionalism, I'm thinking of one article, or these 10 understandings of professionalism, I'm thinking of another article. For some reason, 10 seems to figure a lot in the list. I'm thinking it's very biblical, like 10 commandments. But that's what the presentation was. These were rules. Being professional meant, and then there was always some statement about altruism. There was always some statement about values. There was always some statement about self-regulation, which is a very sociological frame. So you had all of these rules. Being professional meant this and that. And then they went on the wards. They went on the clerkships for US and they saw different things. What they got was a lot of gray. And gray isn't a favorite color in medical school. The favorite colors in medical school are black and white. I'm probably going to say something that will get me into some kind of hot water, but whether it's professionalism or anything else, that black, white, this is what it is, and this is what it isn't. This is what it means to break the rules. This is all formal stuff. I think some people believe that what medical students get in pharmacology, I'm making it up as I'm going along, is the same pharmacology that the graduate students get and the PhD students in pharmacology. No, it's not. It's a different pharmacology. It is much more black and white. You don't want black and white pharmacology graduate students. They need the world. All subject areas are very gray. There are all kinds of contingencies and yes buts within the knowledge base, within the skill sets, and within the attitudes and values of disciplines. But both the presentation and the testing that traditionally has taken place within medical education winds up being very factual and as such not a great preparation, regardless of the subject area, for what's going on in, now we come, the real world. So what do, you medical student, what do you do when you get into a place where, a space we're in right now, altruism, putting the welfare of others ahead of yourself? Well, we've got some new words in medical, relatively new words. They're new to me in the sense that you've graciously mentioned 50 years. And so if anything's newer than 20, it's new. And we have words like burnout. That word didn't exist 20 years ago. And so I can't be interested in everything, but very intriguing to me as to how this concept, this notion, has become a ubiquitous presence and frame within medicine. Yes, there is such a thing as burnout. Wonderful. I don't care whether there really is burnout or there really isn't burnout. I'm a social scientist. You say it's there, it's there. Now, what happens with this thing, and how's the concept used? What kind of presence does it take? Does it become a diagnostic label? Are we going to code for burnout as a diagnostic category? I don't know enough about burnout. I don't know if it's there yet. Well-being, work-life balance, all reasonably new framings, concepts. This is fascinating. I can, now that we're talking, I can remember going into a class of PhD students because they had to have an ethics course because their research was being funded by National Institutes of Health, and the National Institutes of Health required that all graduate students on NIH dollars get training curriculum, formal course on ethics. And somehow within that course, and thank you, I'm remembering this for the first time in 25 years, I brought up the issue of work-life balance. And the students around the table were dumbstruck. What do you mean work-life balance? What they didn't understand. I mean, the words, you can spell the words out, but they didn't have a frame of reference for it. Why? Well, I mean, if I'm in charge of running some experiments and that requires me to come in at night or 3 o'clock in the morning or on weekends, that's part of what I do. That's part of my life. What do you mean work-life balance? Whether they considered their life unbalanced might be another matter, although I don't think so, because unbalance only has meaning with respect to the balance side of things. But in any event, so what happens to altruism in a world where there are competing frames or potentially competing frames like burnout or like well-being or like work-life balance, or for that matter, I haven't ever thought about this before, things like co-production. But I'm going to skip away from co-production because I don't know how to think about it. So, do we, medicine, need to cool it on the altruism chant? Or do we need to double down? You know, these students these days, they don't get it. We need to yell altruism louder. And if the word appears once now, it needs to appear 5 times. The formal curriculum will triumph. Oh, again, I don't care who's right. I don't care who's wrong. I'm curious why faculty might think that students are not altruistic enough and what that word enough means. So how are they supposed to be? And how do faculty decide they know it when they see it? And meanwhile, how are students going to be altruistic zombies? Sorry, I couldn't stay away from the reflective zombies and all. But how are you going to appear altruistic even if you don't feel you're altruistic? Always staying away from this notion of what students should be or what faculty should be, or that's for them to decide. It's not for me. I just want to understand what's going on and what are the plays between the formal and the other than formal, some of which are hidden, some of which aren't. There's a hugely, I think, under examined piece of the hidden curriculum literature that has a formal title. It's called the null curriculum, What Gets Taught by Its Absence, which I got introduced to alongside of the Is It on the Exam, is students decoding, and again, they're so bright, decoding my course outline and course syllabus versus what I actually said in class. And for all of the stuff that was on paper but wasn't in my voice, that wasn't important because that's another way you negotiate. The volume of material is so great. How do you dismiss some of it? Oh, you just listen to what's not said, and that must not be important. Anyway, I've gone too far into this answer as the space between what was getting taught about professionalism and what was being taught formally and what was being taught informally was a rather substantial space. Whether it's been narrowed or not, I don't know. The thing I'm more interested in now, but this is for me personally, is that distinction that I mentioned earlier between issues of professionalism at the level of individuals versus issues of professionalism at the level of organizations, and then the whole frame of institutional professionalism, which, by the way, more homework for me. There's no end to the learning. Has much more of a presence and resonance within, I'm just going to use the word generically, European literature on medical education. You all do a much better job of talking about institutional professionalism, institutional logics, and the like. So medical education in the US has a lot of catching up to do because it is still mired, perhaps, now we get to use the word institutional again, in a societal level, institutional level culture of the individual, which is very US. And maybe a lot of how professionalism was rolled out in this country was rolled out under that aegis of the primacy of the individual. And that you have a different kind of professionalism in other countries, whether it be Germany or the Netherlands, or for that matter, Indonesia or Japan, or I go on. I'll stop.
Wonderful, wonderful, thought-provoking questions. I was hoping for answers to some of my questions, but there's so much to be figured out. So I would like to react to a few things. You talked a little bit about the wanting black and white, wanting certainty, and I think that is very attractive, what we're all striving for. And sometimes a diagnosis or an educational intervention is very black and white, but very often life and interactions between humans is messy, it is gray, it is not straightforward. So I would also love to learn as a student how to deal with the gray, the uncertain. And I think you also partially mentioned the problem of faculty is they need to make an accreditation body happy.
Yes.
So they need to prove reflection has occurred, professionalism has occurred. So they then force these checklists or exams onto students, which I believe then probably leads to them sitting in your classroom and just asking, is this on the exam? A sort of extrinsic motivation, rather than letting your students loose with their wonderful intrinsic motivation they all carry, motivation from the inside. And then I was very surprised to hear about the null curriculum. I've never heard this term, so thank you for introducing it. The absence, and I believe what many students around me suffer from is the absence of such freedom to explore their personal interests, go down a rabbit hole, follow their intrinsic motivation, to the point where they are, it's especially in the bachelor years, the preclinical years, they're extremely exam-driven. And also later on, to get into specialization, they're willing to jump through any hurdle that a supervisor might give. So they come across as socially obedient beings to increase their chances of getting a specialization spot to work. So yeah, I was thinking what we can do about it and how that comes, because you also mentioned that professionalism might play at individual level, but also at the organization. And I was wondering if that's not just a culture problem. Is that just, a me culture where everyone goes for themselves instead of a us culture? Shouldn't we just say, well, we're in this together? The faculty needs to figure it out, the students need to figure it out, the specialist needs to figure it out, and we just do it together. Is that then the answer to bridging or making the hidden curriculum smaller?
the pause is it's part of all wonderful questions, and I'm trying to figure out where within all of them I want to dive, given that I don't remember all of the particulars. One thing I do remember is this kind of cascade of studying for the test, which to me is, sociologically speaking, a parallel to studying, broadly speaking, for the accreditation visit. It's the same thing. You have a high stakes exam. It's called, for us, LCME, the Liaison Committee for Medical Education. The accrediting body comes in and does their visit. So what happens? First of all, you have the rules, if you will. You have the standards. They exist. They're black and white. Nothing is black and white, but they're there. You can read the standards, like you can maybe read the course objectives. But what do they mean? And what kinds of activities get a pass approved? What kinds of activities get a sanction or called out for some reason? So schools spend, at least in the US, schools spend a lot of money. Why are they spending money? Is this a requirement? Oh, and by the way, what's the parallel for students? Oh, at least students who have the means can spend a lot of money on outside of the curriculum, how to pass the test stuff. Sometimes this is an irreverent comment. Sometimes I don't know why y'all bother to go to medical school, except that you need medical school as a licensed way to get access to patients. No criticism here, and I'm speaking in hyperbole. You're not going to class. You're listening to class notes. Oh, and by the way, I listened to your podcast at 1.0 speed. I did not listen to it at 1.5. Or I once heard a group of residents, and one of the reasons I like what I do is because, being an outsider, I can be innocent. I can sit back and say, really, that's so interesting. So what were they talking about? They were comparing the speeds at which they could play back the grand rounds or the lectures, and who had the biggest bragging rights, who could get away or felt that they could get away. I think somebody got up to 2.5. Wow, isn't this remarkable? I felt like I was part of bragging rights, but also the notion that you could do this. I had never hit the switch that allowed you to go 1.5, 2.0. I didn't know it was there. Anyway, this is all replicated at the level of students. Students, at least in the US, spending a lot of, you spend a ton of money to go to medical school. And then you spend a ton of money and time outside of medical school learning other things from other people. And meanwhile, what exams are you taking? Well, one exam that you take, at least in the US, can take, and medical schools will use it, is the National Board of Medical Examiners shelf exams, subject shelf exams. So you'll take an anatomy shelf exam to see how you're doing in anatomy. Why? You have to pay for that. It's not free. And why don't you write your own exam? Because the anatomy department is using a shelf exam, not the NBME, National Board of Medical Examiners, isn't coming in. They do in other ways. But my point is what's going on at the organizational level and what's going on at the student level almost look exactly the same. And you don't think, now I apologize because I do apologize because I'm sounding lectury. You don't think that students in some way don't feel, hear, sense that the prepping that they're doing for exams, the workarounds, the everything else, it's the same thing that's going on at the school level. Oh, is the accreditation visit an opportunity to get better? Yep. Is it only an opportunity to get better? Nope. It's the same thing. So we have this overall learning environment that is populated with these formal structures, but also alongside these wonderfully rich sort of cultural adaptations for dealing with those structures. But they involve some pretty strange rituals. So you hire coaches, they're called consultants, that will do mock visits. So you can take the same thing as taking a practice exam. I don't think we look enough across the educational environment milieu. What's going on at the accreditation level is still part of the learning environment. And I just don't accept as a sociologist that what you see in the classroom and what you see at the level of the organization are two different things. Anyway, you asked me a whole string of things. You used a wonderful phrase, which I did write down. I mean, I do have a piece of paper over here. Socially obedient beings. Okay. Socially obedient organizations. We all operate within normative environments where it's no school is being accredited as a solo entity without reference to the whole accreditation process or people learning the hows and wherefores of how you handle an accreditation visit. Not necessarily true other places, but for a short while, there was actually a hidden curriculum accreditation standard within the LCME. It was officially, it was MS 31-A. So it came in the medical student section of the accreditation standard where it was 31-A. And this to me was fascinating, in part because I was involved in writing the white paper that wound up being the standard. It was rolled out as the learning environment standard. That was the formal label. That was great. I thought it was better than the hidden curriculum standard. But back to my point, so how then does this standard, which is in black and white, you can read it, how is that standard operationalized? Well, there was a school that would be the first school accredited given this new accreditation standard because it didn't exist before. Your school is going to be the first one. Well, how do I know what meeting that standard means? You don't. So you try to, I don't know. Do you go to the LCME and say, well, what are you going to hold me to on this standard? What makes meeting it mean? Anyway, let's say you make it through. Now there's a second school. They get in touch. Just like students talk to students, schools talk to schools. What did you do? How did you pass? Then there's a third, there's a fourth. And now there begins to be some normative understanding of what it meant to have a good learning environment. So what did it mean? How did it all shake out? Well, at least given what one of the LCME secretaries said to me was a certain unhappiness with how it all evolved. Because there's a graduation questionnaire that goes out every year. And on that questionnaire is a question on mistreatment. In the UK, it's called bullying. There's different words, different places, perhaps different connotations. In the US, it was mistreatment. If your mistreatment score was high enough, you didn't pass on MS 31-A. The whole issue of the hidden curriculum, learning environments, et cetera, got reduced for a while to, according to this LCME secretary, it got reduced to burnout and also got reduced to a score that came off of another instrument, the graduation questionnaire, which was owned by the AAMC, the body that overseas represents all medical education in the US. I think of it as a social process. Again, the difference between the standard and how it is operationalized and that space is quite real. And it's also quite normative, at least for me as a sociologist. Schools and, in this case, the LCME, come to negotiate what it means to be in compliance, what it means to pass the test. Same thing for students. And so we're all, in some ways, I mean, it's a provocative phrase that you use, socially obedient beings. I guess we're all socially obedient organizations. And now, are there better ways to structure accreditation? Does it have to be quite so high stakes? Can it be formative rather than summative? Can we run education programs at the level of undergraduate education or graduate medical education or continuing professional development that are more formative than summative? Yes, you can. And is one better than the other? Well, that's for you to decide. I'm just interested in how those perhaps countervailing ways of both establishing that some criteria has been met and fueling this difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, because I think organizations have intrinsic motivation as well. That's a weird claim to make. Organizations, how can organizations be intrinsically motivated? Can you see them as being, you were just, if you don't mind, you were just shaking your head. Talk to me.
I think they can be if they have a good mission or vision where people are involved and they feel part of that mission or vision.
Okay.
And I think people would then be intrinsically motivated to strive for those goals rather than extrinsic motivators such as money or fame or other arguments.
Can you see, I'm being deliberate in my question because of this tension between looking at things at an organizational level and looking at things at the level of individuals. Is there such a thing as the organization being motivated? Or are we talking about the organization as a collectivity of individuals, and that, in a sense, the organization, and I apologize if it sounds like I'm putting words in your mouth, I don't think I am, that the organization is nothing more than the sum total of the individuals involved. So that if you want to understand motivation, you have to understand the motivation of the individuals. And if somehow you were able to measure that, and there was a lot of motivation at the level of individuals within the organization, you'd say the organization is motivated. Or is there something different about, is the organization an entity in and of itself that has motivational elements?
Speaking from experience at just one organization, I think it is more than the sum of its parts, because I speak to a lot of people, also faculty members. I also raise critical questions about what we're doing and if it is motivating students.
Uh-huh.
And I usually get overwhelmingly positive responses, and all the students and all the clinicians are more or less of the same opinions and say we should change this, and we are wasting a lot of time on just checking off lists that don't really contribute to real learning.
Okay.
Maybe learning as as part of the hidden curriculum, but not real learning, they say. And yet the organization seems to change and move at an extremely slow speed, which makes me wonder why. Is that because just some norms have been established from previous generations, or are just hard to change, even if you change out some individuals? Or is everyone lying to me and actually everyone is very happy how it's going? That could also be the case. But it is very interesting for me to witness, because everyone seems to agree that we need to change things in medical education as well, especially with shortages of doctors, people leaving undergraduate training, people leaving postgraduate training.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of literature, we know a lot of things we could try to play with, and yet it doesn't happen.
I like to stay at the level of well-intentioned, motivated people. I don't like to go down, as I said earlier, down the road of negative intentionality. I mean, somebody came up to me early on, one of my very first hidden curriculum talks, and wanted to talk to me about hidden agendas. And I said, no, no, that this notion of deceiving purposefully and the like, I wanted to marginalize. I wanted to stay within sociology. I wanted to stay within issues of structure and culture. So I'm going to say all of your faculty and your peers, they're not lying to you. They're, when they say we're on board, we agree, peers included, they're not lying to you. So what makes it so hard to change? And I mean, you do have regulatory bodies. You do have, whether for us, part of the organization I'm involved with right now regulates graduate medical education. There are not just program standards for individual residency programs. There are what's called institutional standards for those sponsoring institutions that say those, I call them organizations, need to provide certain kinds of resources to the programs in order for the programs to do the work that they do. So there's this whole cascade of things going on. And beyond that, at a societal level, at least in the US, you have changes that are being both mandated politically and also attitudinally about a number of things, DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion types of issues, as would be one example. And so, yeah, I think that the wrestling with, here's what we want to do. We want to say that it's not sufficient anymore to hold medical schools accountable for what they teach. That's an antiquated way of thinking about the responsibilities of a medical school. A medical school needs to be responsible for its learning environment and all that that involves. So we're going to tackle that. We're going to tackle it with a standard. You just got the story about the standard. Doing that kind of work is hard because I think, and I've never said this before, so thank you. I'm going to have fun listening to what either comes out or doesn't come out of this podcast. I think oh boy, I'm going to write this down. I think there's a rush to normativeness, to some kind of shared understanding, to reduce the uncertainty. And so there's a rush to doing the thing that they're agreeing to do, where it is so tremendously difficult and complicated and gray. And the shades of gray are changing all the time because the minute these systems, you take one step, that changes things around it. So it's a rush to something. We need something to show that, hey, we need to show that we're listening to students. So what are we going, now this is the negative frame. What bone are we going to throw to the students to show them that we're listening to them? Now that implies bad intent. And again, I don't want to go down that road. But there needs to be something. And it winds up getting reduced to a very insufficient thing that then needs somebody, maybe like yourself, like a classmate, a newcomer who's coming into the system from outside, who's kind of the emperor's new clothes type of thing, but the emperor doesn't have any clothes on. That's such a weird standard. Why is the learning environment reduced to mistreatment? Is mistreatment bad? Yes. Should students be mistreated? No. What does it mean to mistreat? Ooh, now we get into some, what I hopefully, you phrased it well, conversations, ongoing conversations about the nature of the necessary for learning to train the next generation of physicians, relationships among faculty and students, and the broader society, families, the like. So we're going to broaden things out to work-life balance, other types of frames. And then then there's a rush to the next something, the next proof that we are all in this together. We are listening. We are responsive. The LCME is responsive to medical schools. We like this, we don't like that. And that's something isn't the answer. It's just the next step in an ongoing process of somethings where in the bigger picture, the context is always changing. So, we get into, big picture things like the corporatization of healthcare. What's going on in the clinic? What's going on in the operating room? It's not the same operating room as it was 5 years ago. It's not the same clinic as it was 5 years ago. So those pieces, all the pieces are moving all the time. And we, the people in it, are trying to do what's right. And we're trying to navigate all of these changing pieces. And we're trying to rush to, I'm going to try to stick with this frame, trying to rush to some normative understanding of a solution, a something. And by necessity, given the changing the big picture, it's always insufficient. It always misses the point in some ways. because it's so tough. And so all of those well-intentioned students, bright faculty, caring students are participating in a, a, a social struggle of, I don't, I'm running out of words to go down this particular road, which I haven't been down before, that you've taken me down, and I'm grateful for. So thank you for that.
Thank you for taking us along on the thought ride, because I think it is very.
It's a strange ride.
It's strange, and it's very hard to grasp and make explicit, make it black and white. But that's the complexity of the situation. I like the rush to normativeness, and I think that's what a lot of people experience, is that what currently gets a pass more often than not is the status quo.
Or if not the status quo, which implies no change, but some version of change that looks more status quo than revolutionary or starkly different. It's these, and it's death by incremental improvements, where on some level they don't look like improvements. It's more of the same, but it isn't.
It's probably also tricky because you perceive maybe the incremental movements, but as you said, the same organization has evolved over the 5 years significantly.
Mm-hmm.
And the incremental changes don't seem to quite keep up.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the perception people have.
And you do have problems. We have problems in the U.S. I just stumbled across what is the average length of stay for a dean. If I'm remembering the number correctly, it was either 4.2 or 4.4 years. Not a lot of time to do things like changing culture. Not a lot of time to make things better. And what do deans do back in the U.S. now? They essentially, and this is going to sound sarcastic, and I apologize, because again, there's the well-meaning part I genuinely believe is there. Deans have two jobs: raise money, or make sure that the school is solvent in one way or another. And now I am being a little snarky, revise the curriculum. And so, ta-da, new dean, new curriculum. And why? And again, motives are apart from all of this. Well, if they're only there for 4 years, where are they in year 5? Are they climbing the dean's ladder? Have they retired? The amount of change at the top of the Organization for Medical Education, at least in the US, is astounding. And I think structurally, so here's a nice structural part. I mean, there's a cultural element to it, but structurally, that results in both the kind of change you see and if you will, the change you don't. I wanted to make sure that I asked you a question because of one that you posed when you sent it to me. And I spent some time wrestling with the question. And the question was about advice for students. Answer: no, I have no advice for anybody. But the best balance between the hidden curriculum and the formal, in order to get themselves the best learning outcome. And I wanted to try and wrestle with those best outcomes, but also this notion of balance. And so here comes my question for you. And it's a hypothetical question, and it's tied to a question that I asked the head of graduate medical education at Mayo when I first arrived. And that was, I just asked him, assign a percent to the formal learning versus the other than formal learning that takes place during graduate medical education? What percent would you put into those two buckets? And it's quite nice and ask him and answer me. So I wanted to ask you to imagine yourself, and you had a whether it was a brain filter or a hearing filter, you could only process the formal curriculum. You were not able to hear, understand any that other than formal stuff didn't exist. You had to go through medical school only on the basis of the formal. Two questions. Are you graduating? And if you're graduating, because the answer to the first question could be no, there's no way I can negotiate without knowing all this other stuff. I'd never pass. Or the answer could be yes. And if you pass, what kind of a doctor would you be? Only having been educated under the formal and without any reference at all. No processing, no hearing, it didn't exist. Is it possible?
Yes, I think I would graduate. It's quite a substantial investment you have been through. Probably the hidden curriculum also informs how that investment feels. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But I believe I would graduate, and I think I would be the sort of doctor that would. Yeah. I struggle a little bit because I would say I'm the kind of doctor that was informed by the curriculum, the facts. But then again, a doctor is not just the knowledge part you learn from the books, but a doctor is also a human being that interacts with patients. And that human interaction you learn in messy surroundings in the clinics. And the hidden curriculum is part of that, no matter what. So I struggle to even think about what I would be like as a doctor without the hidden curriculum later on.
Let me be a little less first of all, thank you for the answer. A little less hypothetical. The notion of the best balance at least implies to me that there can be an imbalance where there's too much other than formal. What does that look like to you? I had never thought about it until I read your question. So this is brand new for me. I'm working it out as we go along. But this notion of balance implies either, if you will, a false positive or false negative, too much, too little. At least on the too much side, can you get lost in the other than formal? Can it take over your life too much? I'll stop.
If we make it black and white for this argument, and we say the formal is the theory, learning from the books, facts about the human body, and the hidden curriculum is the new topics, the things we talk about, like burnout, I think we can't move 100% over. I think there should be a balance, because you do need to learn facts in medical school. You need to learn a lot of content. What I meant by my question originally is, shouldn't we have a balance? Maybe that's how I should have phrased it, because what I was surprised by is that there's a lot of research about the hidden curriculum since many years, since decades, and I never heard about it during medical school. Yet it influences me in my daily life.
Mm-hmm.
Just as much as knowing medical information influences me and is crucial. And that's what I wanted to speak to you about. Shouldn't a medical curriculum at least partially address the hidden curriculum, state that it's there, which forms it could take, and what possible benefits and harms are of a hidden curriculum, so that students at least have awareness about it?
Short answer, yes. And slightly longer answer, I would love to see orientation. Now, I'm coming off of where I was for 30 years at the University of Minnesota, more than Mayo. So that's my primary reference is still UME, undergraduate medical education, not graduate. One of the things that ritual happens during orientation is the dean comes in. Welcome. And then there are kind of ritualistic things that get said about being smart and wonderful opportunity. Anyway, the deans say dean types of things. Now I would like to hear the deans say that what is going to happen to you while you're here is an experience that is in part made up of these formal versus other than formal lessons. You are going to see things differently than we see things. And there are some of you among you that are coming from places altogether different. Matter of fact, we have set up admissions. I'm making myself the dean as we're going along. We have purposefully structured admissions to admit as part of the class the not stereotypical student, the different student can be put in better ways. We want to engage you in conversations as we go along about how things look and engage you with respect to these interstitial spaces between the formal and the other than formal, so that we, and by the way, that word is immensely important, we versus you, we do the best job for each other. We, now the dean still speaking, we meaning the dean's office. I'm going to define we. I'm still the dean speaking. We, the dean's office, we, the faculty, we, the students, are in this together. And we, now the faculty in the dean's office, want you, now the students, to help us do a better job. We can't do that better job unless we understand this world that we're all creating together from your point of view. If that is both said and operationalized in meaningful ways, then yeah. But I don't get the sense, and this makes me uncomfortable to say. Earlier, I said something that's genuinely true. I cannot imagine my career without all of the learning that has been afforded to me by medical students. I have been blessed by them all, even the ones that hated me, and then some did. At least they wrote that on their evaluations. That the school thinks of students the same way. I have in the past done, anytime I give a talk, you noticed it, you noted it earlier. I try to do engagement exercises. One that I haven't done for quite a while is on sheeps and cats. And medical education is training future sheeps versus cats. And it's interesting to both pose the frame of reference, and it comes with a lot of background so that what I mean by sheep and what I mean by cats is clearer to the audience. But with the bottom line question, are you educating for future sheep or for future cats? Or are you being educated, the students, as a future sheep, future cats? And it's one of the few exercises that I've ever done where instead of the distribution of data, like that you saw in the triangle exercise, at least in the US, because it's easier, we educate for sheep. And the cat side of it is just independent thinking. I'm wanting to try and conceptualize a medical education system that teaches you to overthrow it, which also means that the system, the education system, is teaching the subsequent generation of students to overthrow you. You don't get to stay in control of things, so to speak. How do you teach students to be disruptors or to be resistors or to be agents of change? And I think those are knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values that are critically important given that the overall structure and culture of the workplace is so rapidly changing. I don't want you to be taught to fit in. Now, I can imagine, and we're getting into motives again, that there might be players in the picture as a whole who want a docile workforce. Do what we tell you to do. Oh, by the way, we're telling you what we want you to do as if it's good medical practice. I mean, that we've co-opted the right to say what a good doctor is. You don't get to say it anymore. We get to say it too. Or our voice is louder than your voice. No, I don't want training for fitting in. I want training to change, to be disruptors. And why? I'm not going to live long enough. But why? I want to see what it looks like. I'm sorry, yes, there's all kinds of things that have happened in medical education over the past 50 years, but by and large, it looks the same. I could take myself back 50 years or take myself from 50 years ago and put myself 50 years forward. And would I recognize that I was in medical education land? Yeah. Has it changed? I guess around the edges. I mean, we've gone from problem-based learning to flipped classrooms to this to that. Are these good changes? Okay, they're well intentioned. They seek to create a better learning environment, but is the picture fundamentally the same? Yeah. And I would love, but I'm not going to be around. I would love to have been the Rip Van Winkle and wake up and go, wow, this is different. I'm not, sorry about the Wizard of Oz reference. I'm not in Kansas anymore. I'm not going to get my wish, but I'd much rather you be pushing. You pushed me. You pushed me to think in ways that I never would have thought had you not been both literally and figuratively putting your arm up and saying, is this on the test? In all of the different ways that you could imagine, both the arm and the voice, you said things to me that made me wonder, there's more here than meets the eye. So now we're back to Peter Berger again. And I want that to continue, but in more substantive ways. At the end of the day, I'm still a patient. I'm going to die. I'm going to have more things than are currently go wrong, and I want a good doctor. But for me, a good doctor is somebody who knows me, and I'm feeling I'm in a world where The only one who knows me is the EMR, the electronic medical record. That's where I exist. And folks drift into the picture and out of the picture, knowing me through an electronic record, because it's always a new person that I'm seeing. And the sort of, even if there's continuity of care, it's continuity electronically. And so I want you to disrupt that. And how to train you to do that is something that's still a lot beyond my imagination.
You mentioned a sort of self-healing curriculum, a self-curing curriculum.
Ah,
A wonderful term, I think. You might not live to see it, yes, but I think you have planted the seed. And I think that's all that counts. So thank you for that. I also, on your last remark, existing in the electronic patient record, I dislike having to look at a screen. So I've made it a habit whenever I am allowed to see patients by myself. I do apologize for having to type and having to look at the screen. And I try to at least keep the opening of the consultation face to face. I try to focus as long as possible on the patient, on the story, as long as I can hold all the information they give me in my head. And as soon as I'm full, I then start typing, because otherwise I can't keep up. But I do agree, it is a tricky thing. The administrative requirements as well that drive this, I believe. And we talked a lot about being different to the culture, having impediments, barriers, and it causes friction for those from outside the system.
yeah.
Or maybe even abrasion, maybe you adapt, maybe you drop out of medical education, right? Depending on how the barriers look on your path to becoming a doctor or a specialist. And I was wondering, there are probably certain good aspects to being cultivated in this world. But there's probably also detrimental effects, because I think what we already talked about was that being foreign, in the sense that you come from sociology into medical education, you bring beautifully fresh perspectives, like Anne de la Croix brought fresh perspectives, as someone from the humanities coming into medical education. So there is chances, but I was also wondering, is there downsides? What are the pros and cons of this hidden curriculum affecting you?
I'll start with a yes. There are pros and cons. I hope this doesn't sound too abstract. I'm suggesting that without using the word reflection, because that in and of itself has been corrupted by both the culture and the structure of the educational process. Again, an intent outside of the picture. But I am asking you to develop the skill that allows you, and I have to do this with mental imagery. You're driving down a street, and all of the skills that are involved in doing that, and it's substantial. I mean, you need to know how to do the drive the automobile. There are the signs, stop signs, red lights. There, turn here, turn. All of that stuff is, I'm going to call it knowledge, skills, and in many respects formal. I don't know if you've ever done it. I don't do it all the time, and I'm being literal in what I'm about to say to you. But every so often, and sometimes it's a little easier if I'm a passenger, I try to imagine that I've never been down the street before. I have been, but I try to imagine it as brand new. And that, for the moment that I do it, changes things for me profoundly. It changes things for me emotionally, But at the same time, I can't, if I'm driving, I can't forget that I'm still operating this. And at the end of the day, I'm still going someplace. And it was the place that I intended to go. So, I intend to be a doctor, you get the metaphor. But I wasn't thinking of it metaphorically when I started. So, can you develop the both skill and the inclination, the intentionality of stepping out of the here and the now, of stepping out of the taken for granted, and to look at it with if not a critical eye, meaning negative, a different eye. I've never been here before. What does it look like? What am I noticing that is different? If you can develop that intentionality, that skill, and and I cannot leave this at the level of the individual. I don't want you to be the solo flyer. You're the only one who's doing this. Because if you're the only one who's doing it, maybe you don't get to say to anybody else, and this is what it looked like, or this is what I experienced, or this is what I thought, because they're not doing it at all. You need to know that other people are doing it too, then their take may be different than your take, but now you're sharing so it's a group thing. And this is why I think of students as agents of change. I think students can generate a huge amount of change. And okay, I'm going on the individual level. I'm imagining me as the driver, et cetera. So this is very difficult for me to say. I am reducing things to a level I don't like reducing them to, which is why I brought the group back in. So that would be both a skill and an attitude / inclination to make the routine strange. Back to that article that I mentioned earlier in academic medicine. I don't know. I do that sometimes. I have literally done that either while driving or a passenger. It's kind of fun. So I guess that's my metaphor. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's where your question took me.
And it took me to another idea.
Please.
I very much like the metaphor, the intentionality behind being a passenger in this car and looking at the world with a sense of wonder.
Okay. Better put than the way I put it, a sense of wonder.
So it made me wonder, in your self-healing curriculum, why don't we make a student who has experienced maybe the more negative sides of the hidden curriculum, who might have been bullied or whatever you might want to call it, or even a group of students, why don't we make them the dean? And make the dean the driver of the car, the official person having to rake in the money, the official function, but actually really have a student who comes into medical education, research, policy with completely fresh eyes, or several students, and let them share their perspective on reflective exercises that they're gonna answer with ChatGPT anyway, or let them share what is meaningful or what social safety is for them, and give them the role of the passenger in that car. It would be very risky, but it could be transformational.
I think that would be a wonderful, I think experiment would be the wrong word to use, because it implies a certain distance from things. And So let's stick with it for a second. What's the phrase? There's a negative phrase here that talks about, are you going to let the inmates run the prison? Well, one of the things I learned in that short period of time when I was a criminology student was that they do. Well, how about if we run medical school like a prison where I think in reality the inmates have a great deal more to do and say about how the prison runs than the medical students have to say and do about how a medical school runs, which is kind of ironic. And I'm saying this in part just because I hope that the overall conversation I can listen to whatever comes out on the podcast, because there is a sociologist, Irving Goffman, who talked about total institutions, and there was a short period of time where there was speculation about medical schools as total institutions, and not so much anymore. But I'm now totally intrigued with vehicles, mechanisms for putting you in charge. I would want to be a part of that. Would you want to be a part of it? Would you? And let's say ahead of time that I promise you at least half of the picture. I don't know why I'm saying this, but I promise you half of the picture in that you will graduate from medical school fully qualified, whatever that means. What I'm not going to promise you is what happens later, all of the specialty stuff or the like. But I will promise you that you will graduate, and you will graduate as a competent MD. Would you go to this school? Would you attend this school?
Yes, I think I would. And I also think fellow students would. I think most of my fellow students I had the pleasure of interacting with over the past few years
Uh-huh.
are very willing to give feedback and change the system. And I think what we talked about earlier, faculty are also very well intentioned, and they do want to, in increasing amounts, want to listen. Yet there's many structural disconnects. So I was part of the year representation, and what I noticed is over the years in the year representation, people would give less and less and less feedback each time. And they would ask more and more if questions can be removed from the exam that were phrased unfairly. So they said, right? So we're back to, will this be on the exam, or can you take this please out of the exam?
Mm-hmm.
So I was thinking for a long time on why this happens. And I believe it is two things. The first thing is feedback also happens within a structure.
Mm-hmm.
The faculty provides a template with questions of the semester for the semester report that students or the year representation can fill out. There isn't a box that says, which questions are we missing? Which questions didn't we ask? Right? It is only the questions they can think of.
Mm-hmm.
So there might be a disconnect with what actually is happening to students. And the second thing, I think, even if students do speak up, bring up things, is that the feedback they give rarely gets feedback or fed back to them.
Sure.
So, and I understand that it's a very traditional things of faculty, deans to listen and to maybe do things behind the scenes. And I believe they are well-intentioned, and I believe they do things with the feedback. But the perception of students is completely different, at least at my organization, because they never hear back what is happening with the feedback. And I believe that even if they were told, we hear you, we're struggling to implement it, but we're trying, that would be enough.
How about the first part of what you were talking about? First of all, I would love to have the students design the feedback. Faculty not just add a question or two as to what are we missing, although that would be a start. But how about the students design their own feedback vehicle, whatever it might be? It might be that you fill out a form, or it might be that faculty have to come and listen to you. Whatever it is you want to feed the faculty, you design how that happens and you design what it is. Could we? So the first part of it is, what are we missing? That would be a step. The second part of it is you do the whole thing. It's all you. What would block, or what has blocked the first part? The getting of a question or two on there that says, what are we missing? What haven't we asked you? What haven't we asked you? What keeps that from happening?
I'm not in a position to say what might stop faculty from asking that question, but I believe, everyone has their own glasses on, a filter through which they see the world. So you will never ask the questions that someone else should ask, right? So you probably also have questions in your head you wish I would have asked you that I can't even comprehend. But I think if you approach your opposite in an inquisitive way, that you can figure it out together, right? And then we come full circle to co-creation, because also me saying, giving feedback to the faculty and expecting them to figure it all out is probably also not a very healthy approach, right? You should then also get the room as a student to help shape a curriculum, co-create, and be involved.
This is, we're back again to the structural complication. You are moving through the educational environment, I'm going to call it, at the speed of light. You are fast-moving creatures. You are cheetahs, not cheater, not cheaters, although that was part of an earlier conversation today. And as such, there are some pretty interesting challenges, not impossibilities. I don't think of anything as impossible, but pretty interesting challenges for how you go about being able to see the changes that at least faculty and administration see as being made. I'm not even going to posit that they are being made, just that faculty and administration sees as being made. Because you're not standing still. And that's really interesting structurally, is that you're making recommendations about this place and at this time. And so certain things start to happen, but now you're not there anymore. You've moved to another house, you've driven across town. Oh, I suppose you could reach back, so to speak, and talk to the people that are there now. Do they notice anything different? Well, that's a troublesome question, because they just know what they see now. They don't know that it was different last year or 2 years or whatever it is. You have to tell them, oh my gosh, it's pass fail now, and it used to be it was all graded, or whatever the change. This is tough stuff, because the moving pieces structurally, so the deans are turning over and you all are turning over, and the only more or less permanent residents are the faculty. And even faculty positions are changing. It's a challenge, but it's a challenge that is meetable as long as now you're doing what you say, this kind of sitting down together, whatever that means. That would be a mark of professionalism at either an organizational level or an institutional level if it was happening across medical education writ large. Because you are engineering, maybe a bad word, but you're engineering a new system of education to, and I hope this is the rock bed motivation, to better serve the needs of the public or to better serve the needs of patients. That's why you're doing all of this. And if that's taking place at a medical school level or across medical education writ large, or we'll even go a further frame out, health professions education, other occupational sectors, nursing, dentistry, whatever, then what you have is either organizational professionalism at the level of that medical school or institutional professionalism at the level of the system writ large. That would make me very excited. That would make me excited that to have the frame of professionalism move from you to the organization, to the system. Does that make sense that the school is now acting professionally because this is what's going on within it? You're creating better education. We are creating better education in service to the public.
So, if I stick with the blue sky thinking about the self-healing curriculum, you mentioned that the faculty is slowly changing, the students are changing, the deans move on every 4 years and they implement a new curriculum and then they're gone. It reminded me a little bit of a quote, I believe, from Heraclitus, that the only constant in life is change.
Okay.
So shouldn't we just embrace that change and instead of making a curriculum have a go-by date and have after 4 years being thrown in the trash and a new curriculum comes around the corner, that we actually don't make it a fixed thing like a PDF, but we make it a living document, like a Wikipedia article, that it can be constantly updated, refined, and not just by faculty, but also that students have access to it, the reasons, the references, so they also understand why they need to do certain things. But also what I like, what you mentioned, is patient involvement.
Yes.
That patients also play a role in saying what a good doctor is or should be. And then to come back to your last remark about the school then acting professionally, is that sort of presenting yourself in a more open way, in a more vulnerable way, the professional part, or what in your opinion makes it professional?
You are doing a certain kind of work. In this case, the work of education, the work of producing future doctors. And you are doing that work purposefully on behalf of others, in this case, the public. And that would come close for me to being either the organization or medical education writ large being professional. You've made me think of a whole bunch of things, but I take you quickly down another exercise, and it's called One Best Sentence. And now I'll truncate this story. The professionalism literature is riddled with calls for better definitions and or a better definition, as if once there's consensus around what this thing is, then we can measure it and we can do all of this wonderful stuff. There was, I can't remember, DuPont, better living through chemistry, but in this case, better living through measurement. By the way, we maybe as an aside, can have, if you ever wanted to, a different conversation, use the word messy. We both use the word messy. I would love to conceptualize what messy medical education looks like, as opposed to evidence-based medical education or metric-driven medical education. But that is an aside. As perhaps it was a response to, I won't tell you the whole story, it was a response to some observations by colleagues. I just decided that in telling the story of a couple of people telling me their, no question on my part, their one sentence definition of professionalism, that I would ask the audience or audiences, what's your one sentence definition of professionalism? And I've done it a couple of times. I usually, this is all, pre-COVID, they would be on index cards, hence the term index card exercises. And which I found out I have ritualistically, I didn't remember this. I can go back to the 1990s and find in my notes index card exercises I did with students, largely ad hoc. Somebody would say something, I'd want to know what the class would think, because you never get what the class thinks. You just get one or two people speaking, and they're always the same one or two people. So what does the class think? Let's ask the class. Write it down. All right, one or two best sentence definition of professionalism. And I've got hundreds of these things. Whether I do anything with them or not, I don't know. The point of doing it was for the audience to get a sense of the range of what the sentences looked like. But then somebody asked me, so what's your one best sentence definition of professionalism? And I thought, oh gosh, what am I going to say? And what came out of my mouth was what we were just talking about in terms of the living document. And that was that professionalism, this is my one sentence definition, is the ongoing conversation about what it means to be a good doctor, with the tripling down on the word ongoing and the tripling down on the word conversation. That's what it is. Are you going to solve the Rubik's Cube? No, you're not. I won't go any further. You're not. It's not an answerable thing that once you have the answer, that's it. Because the context changes, the environment changes, everything. So how do you make medical education the equivalent of an ongoing conversation among students, faculty, administration, and the public, the patients, about what it means to educate future practitioners, again, in service to the public. I always want that in service to why are you doing it? So that's what you made me remember when you talked about living document. Very cool. Why is it important that this class get the same education that the previous class? Exactly the same kind of thing. So what? So that we can measure improvement in learning outcomes? So they did better this year than last year because we included this new module or whatever it is. That's better education through measurement, and I worry about that. But that's a sidebar. I like what you're talking about in terms of a very dynamic conversation in which all parties are equal participants. Yes, certain parties deans know how to raise money. We'll let the deans do that type of thing. Although money for what? I mean, there's still a conversation about the who, the what, the where. I'll stop. Living document.
Living document. And I don't think it will ever be perfect, but I also don't think it needs to be, as long as you embrace
Oh, it won't.
It will never
It
be.
shouldn't be.
No, and it shouldn't be. But I think it's okay if you embrace it and if you make it explicit and you say we're working on it and we are open. And I think it would just raise such more critical doctors in the best sense of the word.
Yeah. The dangerous word there to me is the word it. That there's um, not only will it never be perfect, you don't want it to be perfect. If somebody wound up saying it's perfect, the living comes to a stop. It ends, but the context doesn't end. The big, all of the swirlings that are going on in this wonderful global picture that we have is not coming to an end, hopefully. So it's not just that it won't be perfect. That's the wrong goal. That's the wrong word. You need a different frame of mind. What do you want? What's the goal of what's the vehicle? The vehicle is this conversation and the participation within that conversation. It's the we. There's another, I tend to think about everything in terms of articles. I don't have enough time to write, and I certainly don't have enough time to write for academic publications. And I'm trying to think of different ways of writing that don't involve that steep a climb. However, I've got one that's sort of sitting out there, and it's more about GME, and I probably will never use it, but it's the putting the we back in GME, where the G fronts me, me, me. I don't think that we educate for a collective identity where students see themselves as not only a we of peers, but a we as a meaningful part of that, the macro we. Instead, we have, at least in the US, a very fractured profession that largely now exists across specialty groups and therefore specialty interest. And so, again, putting the we back in this case, medical education. We'll leave the G out of there and figure out how to make the me smaller and the we bigger. I for example, how would your collective medical student body. So I did have you all sitting in the dean's office. There's for me, a very famous picture from the 1960s of students who had taken over, well, two pictures. One, students who had taken over the dean's office at Columbia University during the protests during the Vietnam War. And there's also another not quite so famous picture from my own school, students taking over University Hall. But anyway, and I need to remember the inmates in the prison because I think that's something worth thinking about a lot more. But I am trying to imagine you all in, so to speak, the dean's office, and to what degree you get visited, for example, by others further down the road, residents, fellows, new faculty. How do we tap the newbie and the insights that newbies have, so they don't have to be total outsiders. They don't have to come from another country. They don't have to come from another culture, but they are coming into for us, first year postgraduate interns have a lot to say about how strange the learning environment looks. They don't have to make it strange. It is strange. Well, how do they speak in the dean's office or speak to the dean's office, but then in turn, sorry, you've taken my mind in a couple of different directions. So thank you.
It's wonderful to sort of think out loud with you and bounce back and forth ideas and visions of the future, because I think there's a chance for this to really happen and put significant change into medical education.
I hope so, if only from a patient perspective. I also worry, wonder. I don't know what things look like in the Netherlands. That medicine is slowly choking itself off from being a meaningful player in the broader conversation about on behalf of the public. There are a variety of other, I choose to use the word occupation because I don't want to just call everything a profession willy-nilly. And I do find it quite interesting that somehow in the classroom, the notion of interprofessional education and teamwork in the workplace, etc. But further upstream, all of these different occupational groups are involved in different ways. And again, I don't know about the Netherlands at all, in different ways around local for us state legislatures arguing about scope of practice, who gets to do what and who gets paid for what. And with groups, I don't know any other way of saying it, fighting it out. So there's all this skirmishing going on upriver, but in the classroom, it's all supposed to be love. And but doesn't look like love upstream. But I worry then in terms of meeting the needs of the public, where medicine is going to fit. I can imagine a future. It's not a good imagining as far as I'm concerned. And now I'm giving you my biases. A time when most of primary care, if not all of primary care, is not delivered by physicians. And I can easily imagine other occupational groups saying the data shows. I'm being dramatic intentionally, because that's a phrase that has great credence within the culture of medicine. The data shows that care delivered by, and then whatever words you want to use, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, mid-level providers, advanced care practitioners, they're called all different kinds of things in all different places, and there are all different kinds of battles going on around who gets to do what and who is what and who's important for what, where the entirety, I'll go extreme, the entirety of primary care is delivered by non-MDs. And that MDs are both trained for and work within a highly specialized and research intensive translational research environment. So the sort of the cutting edge. Oh, I've got something for you to read. I apologize. It's available online. Do you like science fiction at all? Well, whether you do or not, that was has nothing to do with my suggestion. There's a novella written by Isaac Asimov called Profession, and we can read it and talk about it. But it's his view of professions in a future world. And while what I said is not an off take on his particular vision of it, I can't imagine a workforce where the work of being a physician is more circumscribed in certain respects, but that also the training for that kind of work makes for a very different medical school.
Interesting. And with a lot of points we've discussed, I tend to see similarities to society in a broader sense, right? The
Okay.
same mechanisms and interactions play in a medical school at the same time, right? Political opinions and so on. So I was wondering, medical school could also just try to set a wonderful example, right? In a way that we treat each other and how we figure it out together. So we could also just rephrase it like that, even because quite often we hear, yeah, in the current political situation, this can't happen, that can't happen. But yeah, you made me think about, so medical schools need to serve the public somehow, right? We talked about professionalism. It could also serve in that sense, right? Like the way we look or we rethink education could be sort of secondary outcome from just raising better doctors.
This is intended as praise. You've just taken me to a place that I've not even had an inkling of imagining. You're making medical education better. Sorry, I live in a world of making America better again. MAGA, making medical education better again. Ooh, as a model for change in the educational system writ large. That's powerful thinking. Good for you. I would love to be along for that ride, if only because, and no faint praise, false praise. To do that is, you're a lot smarter than I am. That's something, because, well, we're coming back to professionalism. If what we are about is in service to, then how, but remember, the hidden curriculum as it was rolled out within the sphere largely of K through 12 education was talking about the various ways, the informal ways, the hidden ways, the like, that aspects of social order and conformity were built into, the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic. There was all this other stuff. How do you make the hidden curriculum and more the learning environment, the interplay between the formal, and I don't want it to reside in one thing, the interplay between the formal and the other than formal, as in service to not the status quo, but to making things better, without going into this awful place of, well, what's wrong with what's going on right now? Are you trying to imply that this isn't good, or we don't have, that? Anyway, you're a big thinker. Why are you in medical school? You're a big thinker.
Thank you very much. I only have these thoughts thanks to being an international, being a foreigner to the local culture. I don't think I would have ever had these thoughts if I went to medical school at home.
So, how do you keep yourself being a foreigner? That was part of our conversation earlier. How do you plan on staying strange and staying a stranger?
I try to think critically and differently in a way that an improv comedy game has taught me.
Ah,
I believe improv comedy could have a wonderful role in medical education.
okay.
Being on stage, figuring things out together spontaneously, it's more or less what we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And there is even implementations now called medical education empowered by theater, which merges
Yes.
theater of the oppressed from Brazil with also a few improv games
Yeah.
to make the implicit more explicit in experience. But anyway, I digress. There's this game called Squeeze the Duck.
Squeeze the duck. Okay.
Yes, where you say a statement on stage. For example, you respond to someone, I love you too. And then someone else squeezes the duck. And then you need to say, I hate you. And then someone else squeezes the duck again. And you start to struggle and you say, I love the way you look. And they squeeze the duck again. And you are forced to say a new sentence every time. And you run out so quickly out of things to say. And it's this wonderful thing where at the fourth or fifth revision of the sentence, you take the scene you're currently playing in a completely different way.
Huh.
And it's a brutal exercise in that it's very tricky to do, being squeezed, hearing the duck being squeezed. But it forces you to think differently, to come up with new sentences on the spot. And I try to apply that to situations where I'm in and I go to my autopilot in my brain who wants to respond a certain way and I go, no, squeeze the duck, try again, okay, try again. And then I pick my favorite.
Mm-hmm. Would you ever consider writing either yourself or with somebody else? My favorite somebody else is the person that brought us together, Marco. And that is something like a squeeze the duck approach to educational reform. So you get at the beginning to describe both what squeeze the duck is. I mean, I don't like the word definitions, but you need to help your audience to understand what it is you're talking about. And then you get to put in the surrounding context of both theater of the oppressed and improv and the like. And now, how does all of this, and particularly this one aspect, Squeeze the Duck, provide a challenge to educational reform? What does a Squeeze the Duck approach to educational reform look like? And how would education, medical education in particular, benefit from engaging in a school, make it one school, a school-wide squeeze the duck exercise? Could you help a school to see that? People can imagine. I was just imagining, because I've gone to one or two. They're not my favorite thing, but then I'm old and limited in my thinking. I've gone to one or two improv sessions at Mayo. And so when you said, I still don't quite get it, but when you said squeeze the duck in improv, I could visualize. How would you help us visualize this at a school-wide level and what squeeze the duck would look like in ongoing conversations about what it means to educate better in service to the public? That I think that would make a great article, and I can easily imagine, just because he's so bright, Marco having some interesting things to say.
Thank you very much. I will suggest it to Marco. The key of this game is that the person with the duck is in charge and is outside of the scene, right? So 2 or more people are playing a scene, and the person with the squeaky duck then decides which sentence is a key sentence and needs changing.
Okay.
And I think that is beautiful, right? So if we take a sentence like, the lecture will start at 9 a.m. and we squeeze the duck, the lecture will start when the lecturer wants to, and we squeeze it again, and the lecture starts when the students want to. And then we squeeze it again and again and again.
Okay.
And just use it as a thinking game to see where we end up. I think that's rather interesting indeed. Yeah.
And in terms of your reference back to mission and values, or mission statements and value statements, which are, again, formal declarations, with the more interesting aspect being how they're rolled out. But how this reconceptualization and reoperationalization of medical education then would come to be represented in a mission statement and a value statement. So that, for example, me as a potential applicant would look and say, oh, wow, this is a different medical school. Different things are going on here. It's not just a new school, it's a different school. Anyway.
I think involvement would be key there. It reminds me of a quote from Stephen Covey, I believe, and it's for businesses and business leaders, but I think you can apply just as well to medical education. He said, without involvement, there's no commitment. And what he talks about is when companies draft mission statements, they create their values, the wall tattoo they have in the entry hall.
Yeah.
It all sounds great. It always sounds great. There's a communication department who spent thousands of dollars on it, many hours.
I love that phrase. I haven't never heard it before.
And the people who walk by, they just go, yeah, they say that. But the culture in the company is completely different. Often, not always.
Mm-hmm.
And so he really wanted to highlight by saying that you need to involve everyone. So in the medical school, it would be the student, the nurse, the patient, the dean, in as a community to draft a mission and vision. Involve people and they will commit to it as well. Otherwise, once again, it's this top-down thing you're being told. So that's what came to mind.
Who knew that when we started this conversation, we were going to get to squeeze the duck?
Squeeze the duck. And I had one more idea come up during the podcast, and I forgot to mention it. It was probably an hour ago or so. When you also mentioned sometimes you need to say things that aren't so nice, but they are probably valuable to be heard. There's a marketing guru in England, Rory Sutherland, and he once asked people, I believe as a joke, but I really like the idea, who will join him in creating the career-ending conference.
Mm-hmm.
So a conference where everyone comes and shares the research projects they've abandoned, the research projects that would be damaging to their careers. And I like that sort of blue sky and completely inverted thinking, instead of just presenting how great we are, how great our new curriculum is, how wonderful everything is, that we actually say, hey, we had this experiment. Yes, okay, experiment might not be the right word, but we had this intervention, we tried this new approach, but it failed miserable. But here's why it failed, and here's what you can even learn from this failure.
And I'm within that context, I'm probably going too far, but going back to you've seen one medical school, and the notion of, and perhaps the Netherlands, you'll have to tell me, does a better job of this. We don't have a system of medical education. We don't have a vehicle, an overall vehicle of saying, well, here are the needs of the public, and so we're going to set up a consortium of medical schools to meet that need. Some will do these things, some will do those things, and the like. We don't have that. And so the notion that we have a system of medical education that meets the needs of the public is not true, even on face value, because there really isn't a system. So back to this notion of no involvement, no commitment. I'm losing my trains of thought, and I apologize.
That's okay. We've talked about so much, and sometimes we have circled back, and sometimes we've moved down entirely different streets. But that's wonderful because it's very thought provoking. Are there any things I didn't ask that I should have asked?
Excuse me. You can tell your audience that produced the most laugh from me, given all of the different things that we've talked about. I actually put together a couple of slides for myself of, oh, here are some points you might want to make, Fred. And then I just thought, no, I'm going to let myself be guided by your questions and let it go at that. All right, here's a passing, if final thought. Although the concept of hidden curriculum, at least within medical education, situates itself within medical education or the medical school, it's the reminder that your students, in the sense of now the your is faculty administration, come to you well socialized into the fact that within social life in general, informal norms, rules, and the like are often the determining factor in what goes on in social life. That the posted speed limit is not the real speed limit. It's this other thing. Well, what is it? Most people in this country can give you the real speed limit if you tell them what the road is. And how do they learn that? Well, they look. They see other people. They see people not getting pulled over when they drive at this speed, and it's not taught in the driver ed class. It can't be taught. That's another important thing. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in the other than formal curriculum. The reason that it's in the other than formal curriculum is that can't be taught in the formal. It's too deviant, but the world can't operate based on just the rules. This is a fun recollection for me, and I apologize for going on. And as I understand it, in the early days of self-driving cars, they had programmed the cars to operate based on the rules. So you had a car coming to a four-way stop and stopping and never starting again because it had been programmed to wait until the other cars stopped, because those are the rules. You come to a complete stop, and then there's a certain sequence, it's the car to the right that has the right of way, blah, 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 blah. But that's not how people drive. And so they had to go back and reprogram. You couldn't program a self-driving car based on the official rules of the road. It doesn't work. And they had to make it more real. And so students come in expecting that there are the official way to do things, and then there's all this other stuff. And in part, their job is to learn this other stuff. It's just a different place that they're operationalizing something that they've learned their entire lives. I don't particularly like the term hidden curriculum because it both is a category term as a stand-in for other than formal, and it's a subcategory of stuff within other than formal. There's informal, there's null, but also people come up with words and ways that they terms that they want to use to help better describe what's going on. And I like that fact that there's and this is part of the joy of the area, is that there's a hidden curriculum literature. There are people who are writing about the hidden curriculum never use the term. Should they use the term? No. Why? Why do they have to use the term? But it is all about the other than formal ways in which social life unfolds. So there's an irony here. And maybe I'll end with this, although I don't want to end. The irony is that if you do a scoping review on the hidden curriculum, and part of that scoping review methodology is, okay, you're not just going to use the term hidden curriculum, you're going to use the term informal curriculum. Maybe you come up with your thesaurus of terms. You're never going to get it all, because again, the concepts that are used and/or the topics that are investigated are always broader than you're going to come up with. So does that make the hidden curriculum scoping review literature bad? No, but it's incomplete because of this hidden curriculum literature. And so life becomes fascinating in that you're reading something and all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's about the hidden curriculum, but they don't use the term at all. I mean, maybe we can reduce it all to it's just making sure that you always keep a distinction between teaching and learning, that they're not the same thing. And that to do good education, you need to take into account both sides of that coin, which then also includes the learners, of whom everybody should be a learner. In other words, maybe we should get rid of the word administrators and faculty, and it's just all a learning community. And that we're engaged in that practice and that process because we're here to learn. Why? On behalf of the public.
Teaching and learning are not the same, or don't have to be the same. Wonderful, wonderful words, and I think a beautiful closing statement. Again, it raises more questions with me, but I will hold back. I was hoping to get some answers today.
Oh dear.
Which I have, but I have also gotten a lot more questions, which is also something you notice in research, right? You try to answer a research question and you come out of it with 10 new research questions.
Yes.
So I think it was full-on success. So thank you very much for your time and sharing your story and your insights. And I think it was thought-provoking, and it offers more than enough points for people to start reflecting on their own journey. And that is why I was very glad to have you on, because reading your publications has created awareness for me that the hidden curriculum exists. And I've noticed how at least parts of it that I can notice are affecting me. And that has been really changing as a medical student, navigating both the visible and the hidden curriculum. And I'm now even aware that this also exists outside of medical school. And indeed, I do drive differently in Germany and in the Netherlands.
Okay.
So thank you for that as well. There's very different rules on what the maximum speed entails and when you get ticketed. So thank you. I wasn't really aware about the differences, but yes, I do adjust.
Wonderful. You have created for me a certain fandom. I mean, I did tell you that I have listened to at least the 3 previously posted podcasts, and I will continue to listen because it's a way for me, now that I'm not in the classroom anymore and I don't have the kind of contact that I did. I miss it, but it's the nature of things. This will be my way of staying in touch with the student perspectives. And so I wish you genuinely wish you every success and look forward to, I know you've had one more recent, whenever the next one goes up, tell them that I said to listen to the other podcast. If they're listening to this one, go to the other ones, because they too, if only for self-interested reasons, they too speak to issues of the hidden curriculum, both directly and indirectly. There's all kinds of things in there. Nice job. I mean, you do a great interview.
Thank you very much, and thank you for also challenging sometimes my beliefs, questions, or language, which shows how ingrained certain things have become. And hope to have you back soon for follow-up questions. There's probably a ton I will think about as soon as we end this conversation. And I also wish you all the best, and I hope that our paths cross again soon.
Thank you.